Okay, so I think people will probably keep joining us, but we can go ahead and get started if that sounds good. I'm Jessie Haley. I'm the program manager for creative writing at the University of Chicago. Thank you everyone for coming. We're really excited for this event. It's a multimedia Zoom event, so should be really fun. I'm just going to briefly talk about our host, co-host, the seminary co-op, and then I'll turn it over to the people you came here to see. I'm sure many people are aware of the seminary co-op, but for those who aren't, it's 2 independent bookstores in Chicago by the University of Chicago campus, founded in 1961. The titular seminary co-op is known for its vast selection of academic texts. I'd say unlike any other bookstore in the world. There's also 57th Street Books, which has an amazing literary collection and great kids books, deep backlist. Both of these stores are treasured parts of the Chicago community, the Hyde Park community, the University of Chicago community. The co-op was a co-op with members for a long time, but since fall 2019, the co-op has been the country's first and only not-for-profit bookstore with a primary mission of bookselling. And like I said, it's a very treasured place, integral to both the local and international community. And you can support the seminary co-op by buying books online for curbside pickup, local delivery, and they ship internationally. I will put the link for buying this book in the chat. And the book that you're all here to learn more about. Yeah, I just want to thank the Seminary Co-op for making this event possible, and everyone here as well. Looks like we lost Lauren for a second, but I think she'll probably be back. I will turn it over to Carmen Elena Mitchell, who will give us a little context for what we'll see first.
Thank you, Jessie, and thank you to the Seminary Co-op bookstore. I worked there in high school, and I can attest to the fact that it is one of the greatest bookstores I've ever been to. So buy your book there. So a little bit about the first thing you're going to see. So you guys all probably came to hear the reading, but before we have the reading, we're going to see a very short film clip that is, it's basically an introduction to a film that is on the same subject, a film about Gabriel that I've been working on basically since his death. It was a film that Gabe and I actually started together a number of years ago, and it was intended to be on the subject of what is mental illness? What does it exist? These are questions that he had, and after his death, I decided to kind of take on this project as my own. I decided it was kind of my inheritance, this film, and so I'm exploring some of the questions that he had, but also exploring who he was and his own story in the film. My idea for it is that it is sort of a co-narrated film. So that's a little bit about the piece. You're going to meet Gabe more through the reading, and I just wanted to give you sort of a visual to go along with that. And Jessie, you can go ahead and play it now.
This is my brother, Gabriel Mitchell.
If I'm gonna be crazy and everybody's telling me I'm crazy, then I want to be really good at it. I want to be the Michael Jordan of craziness.
In 2010, we decided to collaborate on a film about mental illness. Right, so what's today? Today is
Wednesday, December 29th, 2010.
Great. So, Gabriel, why are we doing this movie?
I guess we're just trying to get at some kind of truth.
20 years earlier, Gabriel had been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Your son is suffering from a thought disorder. He's paranoid. He has ideas of reference. He thinks everything is a signal for him.
And he was rolling around on the living room floor with the large coat and the hat, saying, Mom, there's something inside me. I don't know what it is.
As he started to kind of process what this meant, he started interviewing everyone he knew about what mental illness is.
This is interview number 1. What do you think about mental illness, mental health, and our society?
What's your name, man?
Hey, Fred.
Nice to meet you, Randy.
Nice to meet you as well.
Where I would eat cornflakes and I would feel like it would feel like electricity.
What do I think of mental health? I'm in favor of it. I like mental health.
When we started working together, we thought it would be interesting to examine mental illness both from the inside and from the outside.
People have been going mad at least for 3,000 years.
Madness, I think, can sometimes mean extra insight, visionary,
touched by angels.
Does mental illness really exist? Is it a label that society has created to limit certain types of behavior? And what does it really mean to live inside of those labels?
The naming of mental disorders has an interesting history.
And I think it's helpful often to not have words for it.
No, we aren't mentally ill, we are psychiatrically challenged.
It's bad enough having the illness, but when you've got the label...
What's the word when somebody's not paranoid, but neurotic? Neurotic.
It's that fear of being cast out of society that's worse than virtually anything I can imagine.
You seem calm and relaxed.
That's because I'm on tranquilizers. As far back as I can remember, I've always seen things that weren't there. And I've always been a daydreamer.
And then on June 24th, 2012, Gabriel left the project. He didn't leave a note. He left writing, he left words, he left line drawings and songs and images, stories. He left, his thoughts. I guess, he left clues.
I wrote a screenplay basically telling my whole life story.
Once upon a time, there was a beautiful young man. He left home at the age of 18 to study film. When he got there, he met a lovely young lady and they fell in love.
Most of the ideas came from dreaming, lucid dreaming while I was awake.
And he believed he saw a vision of God, and it looked like him.
I felt like I just had to...
Most of the ideas came from dreaming, lucid dreaming while I was awake.
And he believed he saw a vision of God, and it looked like him.
I felt like I just had to start paying attention to all of these different pieces.
An anomaly arose in the vortex, an anomaly called life, and life is governed by rules.
If you had a zoom lens and you dove into the heart, the very center there of the grid, you'd find a square.
He knew that the whole project of squaring the circle is a symptom. No real mathematician believes you can do it anymore. My old friend Anthony Gormley, who had met Gabe and knew about his work, Anthony offered to realize this idea that Gabe had of an infinite cube.
But I think he was very, very aware of the idea of the grid as as a matrix through which you could see all things. This infinite cube of Gabriel Mitchell's.
I never understood it while he was alive, but now it's like the grid is mine. Like I feel like I need to kind of figure it out.
As we know, people are malleable and plastic and they can change. And they are changing. They're always changing. Even beyond the grave, they're changing. That's part of life, is that it's constantly moving.
We're all peering, trying to see, trying to find. trying to find him, but I do feel like he's in there. I mean,
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. So where is everybody else? Okay, my computer completely crashed. So I'm not sure if I can see. Oh, there is everybody. Phew. Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, it's not really my fault, but okay. Carmen, that was amazing. And I think it's my job right now, until somebody sends me a new Zoom link that I can get on my other computer through. My job right now to introduce my beloved colleague, Tom Mitchell, and also to say that, you know, this conversation that I hope we have is going to include Carmen and Janice as we try to pursue, you know, Mental Traveler and sort of what it means to be writing a memoir and then also having a kind of transmedia, collective, familial memoir. So Tom's going to read for about 10 minutes. You're muted, Tom.
Okay, thanks very much, Lauren. I thought Carmen's film, I think, really introduces you to a lot of what Gabe was. He had a major ambition in his life as a filmmaker, and that was to make a film about madness, about schizophrenia particularly, but he was inspired by a film group that we assembled in around 2008 on Godard, and centered on the Histoire de Folie, the Histoire du Cinema, Godard's 9-hour film about history as seen through movies and the history of movies. We studied it for 10 weeks together and had discussions every night. A lot of my colleagues are part of it, and Gabriel was very much part of our life, my life as an academic, Janice's life as a composer. We watched Histoire du Cinema for 10 weeks, a 1 hour each week, which we would watch twice, and then have a discussion, usually led by Tom Gunning and Miriam Hansen and Yuri Sivian, our great film colleagues who knew everything there was to know about this film. Gabriel was also studying film downtown. He was taking courses from a who's who of Chicago film reviewers. So that was really his medium. But as you can see from Carmen's film, it wasn't the only medium. He was also making cartoons, animated films, poems, drawings, and the one kind of major artwork that he left behind was the plans for the infinite cube, this 3 by 3 by 3 glass cube with 1,000 LED lights inside of it, a 10 by 10 by 10 grid in which every angle of it went off into infinity. This was in fact realized as a work by Antony Gormley, and it's in the Smart Museum right now. When the Smart opens again, I hope we'll be able to bring it out into public. But I thought I would just give you a sense of some of the film projects he was involved in. One of the last ones he was working on was a film entitled De Jewels. Every Chicagoan knows that De Jewels is a grocery store, and that was where Gabe worked for over 10 years. It was part of his transition out of the mental health system into the straight world, to be able to hold down a job as a produce clerk. So he planned a film called The Jewels, which would be a combination of a documentary of a day in the life of a big city grocery store with a heist film about a multi-million-dollar jewel theft. The script was never completed, but we talked about it many times. The aim of the film was to turn his daily life into a festival or carnival, a comic action film modeled on that 1963 classic, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. The Jewels was to feature a high-speed cops and robbers car chase through Chicago inspired by the Blues Brothers and a scattering of jewels along the route of the Gay Pride Parade. In Gabe's film, diamonds would have been hidden inside hundreds of watermelons supplied by Jewel, and the bursting of watermelons and the scattering of real diamonds on the streets was to incite a climactic crowd scene crosscut with a frantic car chase to City Hall. But my favorite scene from The Jewels was Gabe's vision of the opening credits. Here's how he described it in screenwriter's form. Interior of Uptown Jewel Food Store, 3 a.m. The store brightly lit and the PA system blasting out Rage Against the Machine, while stock boys wearing rollerblades zoom through the aisles, restocking the shelves. Hundreds of cameras are mounted at numerous angles in the style of Lars von Trier's Dancer in the Dark, with the main action filmed at floor level by a camera on a skateboard ridden by the director, racing through the aisles, tracking the rollerbladers. This continues while the opening credits roll, ending in a climactic shot as the music ends in a quiet back room with masked figures huddled around a stack of watermelons. A deep baritone voiceover introduces the film as a documentary of a day in the life of an urban supermarket. Gabe's voiceover, a lot goes on behind the scenes in a big city grocery store that customers know very little about. And thus, Act One begins with close-ups of glittering diamonds being inserted into the watermelons. Then I want to read a bit of his thinking for another script, which was directly, he wrote one script, he of course made the film Crazy Talk, a 10-minute film, which is available on his website and you can see it anytime. But he had one film that was directly on the subject of mental illness. And it involved two characters. Let me find the page here. And I see some of you actually have copies of the book, I'm happy to say. And so it's around page 82. One of the things that I think was most notable about Gabe's suffering from schizophrenia, most people didn't know that he had this illness. He was very unusual in the sense that he was quite sociable. At large parties, at our beloved neighbors, Bill and Bernadine, he would work the room talking to everyone because he assumed that everybody had a kind of infinite chaos inside their head, very much like his own, and infinite ambitions. And so the minute he met somebody, he tried to draw them out. A lot of people after his death said, you know, I kind of measure my life from the day I met him because we had a talk that was so intense. I never forgot it. So let me describe his screenplay for The Politics of Dreams. In this film script, he divided the character of his alter egos in two. On one side is a famous Hollywood director and actor named Abby. In the opening scene, he is about to receive an Academy Award for Lifetime Achievement. At the same time, he is completing his magnum opus, a manuscript called Quantum Geometrics, a Unified Physics of Peace. On the other, in scene 2, we are introduced to George, a failed screenwriter who is a paranoid, delusional psychotic and a drug addict. George hates Abby for his success and for his bad taste in films. He is outraged that Abby regards Casablanca as a better film than Citizen Kane. Abby represents the industrial model of cinema as mass culture, while George is portrayed as the frustrated auteur who identifies with Orson Welles. If Abby is a projection of Gabe's grandiose ambitions, George is a portrayal of his actual suffering, beset by nightmares and voices urging him to commit suicide. George tries to assassinate Abby as he walks the red carpet at the Oscars and succeeds in leaving Abby not dead, but in a coma. The interesting plot twist in Politics of Dreams occurs when Abby awakens from his coma, decides to forgive his assassin, and invites him to spend time with him in his hospital room. So George is wheeled in wearing a straitjacket, and together they watch a retrospective of all the films in Abby's long career. The films comprise every genre known to Hollywood: Western, science fiction, noir, psychological thriller, courtroom drama, boxing, dinosaurs, crime procedural, war, even a picturesque biker film modeled on Easy Rider. Every film has a Hollywood ending, with Abby as cowboy, astronaut, detective, scientist, or Christ figure who always gets the girl and saves the world. George, as he watches this, is completely contemptuous of Abby's success, insisting that these formulaic films are trashy productions for the commercial culture industry. He then reveals that he himself is a screenwriter. My scripts are about real things, not some dream factory. And he gets a lecture from Abby on how to pander to audiences to have a successful film career. While the retrospective is unfolding, George is wriggling his way out of his straitjacket so that he can finish Abby off. He does, free himself. He strangles Abby, who will later, of course, be resuscitated in standard Hollywood ending style. And George escapes from the hospital, cutting off his own legs to free himself from his shackles. After a long, legless crawl through sewers, George winds up dead in a crack house and is taken to the morgue. But there, a small miracle occurs. A mysterious housefly crawls out from George's hair. An escape hatch opens in the middle of George's lifeless brow, and a miniature version of George crawls out and mounts the fly, which takes off like a little Pegasus to fly back to Abby. George becomes Abby's invisible companion, riding on his shoulder like a familiar spirit or incubus. The screenplay ends with Abby delivering a eulogy at George's graveside, as the fly takes off with the miniature George riding like a cowboy directly into an electric bug zapper, where they are fried instantly. I'm not going to try to share with you my reading of this amazing script. It's just, it was, well, Gabe, I read it and talked about it with Gabe many times. It became part of our family lore. But the thing that drew me in most, and I'm going to conclude with this, was Gabe's idea for the 9-hour Histoire de la Folie modeled on Godard. That was going to be his great achievement. And he then announced that I was going to be his research assistant for this film. Some of you know I'm an image researcher, an iconologist by trade. And so he said, I expect you to provide the atlas or Bible, pre-production atlas for the film. So, and in fact, this turned into what is now a 10-year project. I'm nearing the end of writing a book called Seeing Through Madness, which really grew out of Gabe's assignment to me to create this atlas for his film. So the pre-production atlas, and this is the final page of the book. The pre-production atlas of the planned film was well on its way in my work on it and in his thinking about it toward a reflexive turn toward the very idea of the atlas as such. This crazy attempt to hold up the whole world, to see it all, as if, as King Lear put it, we were God's spies. It was to be a Herculean task, foreshadowed by the ambition of the first great art historian who tried to produce a universal atlas, Abby Warburg, who, by the way, suffered from schizophrenia, was hospitalized with it for 4 years. By this point, it seemed clear to me our fantasies about his film and his life and career were merging, and his dream was taking over my life as a scholar. Or was it the other way around? Was I swallowing up his project, making it mine? Either way, I'm stuck with it, still inside of it. Some part of me went over the edge with Gabe and is still falling and flying with him. It was the best part of me. Did it go with him into the case or the world that he created, that he was? I still can't let him go and still don't know how to end the book or if I really want to. It hasn't done anything to assuage my guilt for failing to keep him alive, failing him as a father, but neither has it lessened my sense of wonder at the life he gave us. I never wanted to claim that he was a great undiscovered artist like Van Gogh, but that he was someone who felt that level of ambition struck down before he was able to fulfill it. What he gave us was something more profound than an oeuvre, as Foucault put it, and this was one of his slogans. He wanted to overcome Foucault's claim that madness was the absence of the work. He wanted to say, no, madness will be the work. He did not live to give us the oeuvre, but he did give us an idea, a concept of transforming schizophrenia into something useful, putting it to work. He never completed his infinite cube either, but he did make a model. Anthony Gormley brought it into the world. He never made his 9-hour film or walked on the red carpet at the Academy Awards, but he gave me a model for how to survive and for a time prevail over schizophrenia. In the absence of the work, he gave me a job that will never be finished. So that's a little bit of the deathless prose in my memoir. I feel very strange reading it because it's all of a piece, and I never feel like I'm reading the right piece of it. But that's the best I can do today. So let's talk.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Well, I have lots of questions. You and I have talked a lot about this event. And so, but I thought it was a very special occasion too, because the entire family is here, all of whom are artists of Gabe. That is, all of whom have taken his life and made work from it in really different mediums. And so, and I have some thoughts about that, but I really didn't want us to lose Carmen's film. And so, and then Janice decided to read after we're finished, but Janice's poems at the end of the book are just completely, well, I'd say completely open, but what's completely open? But anyway, there's a kind of amazing tenderness throughout the different genres of Gabe that you guys are producing. And so I wanted to open by asking, do you think you are holding the same Gabe? And the sub-question is, does the medium have anything to do with that? Do you want Carmen to go first?
Yeah, Carmen, why don't you say it?
Sure. Yeah, I think we are all holding slightly different Gabes. I think everybody who knew Gabe is holding a slightly different Gabe. You know, as my brother, he's always my baby brother, and I'm, you know, when he was born, he was like this gift to me. And he's always been my muse in one way or another. I remember in high school when I really started identifying myself as a writer, I wrote a poem about him. And I was just always very intrigued as to kind of, you know, what was going on in his mind even then. And this is, you know, way before he started exhibiting symptoms. And, you know, in in one of his screenplays, he also has a muse, and his muse's name is Carmen. And so, you know, we had a relationship where we were, you know, kind of, I think we were both very intrigued by each other's sort of artistic process. And it was something that we shared about a lot and talked about. So yeah, so that's my Gabe. And my Gabe is really, you know, we connected on the fact that we were both fascinated and interested in film and wanted to be filmmakers. And so, you know, the film that we started together was really our first collaboration. But it was something that we both were kind of obsessed with and fascinated with. And I think just the sibling experience with schizophrenia, I think, is a little bit different than the parental one, in that, you know, for me, as I was seeing Gabe's illness, you know, I always had to kind of think about, well, why not me? Like it could have just as easily been me. And I often imagined what that would have been like if the positions were reversed. And that's, you know, so that's just something sort of generally, I think that may be true of other siblings too, who are kind of watching their brother or sister go through something like this.
That's amazing. I have questions for you. I mean, Tom has a passage in the book where Gabe is visiting you in Hollywood, and you allowed him into the Hollywood fantasy world, which wasn't a symptom. I mean, it's a symptom of capitalism. You know, it's a symptom of a lot of things, but it wasn't a symptom of an illness he had, but a kind of atmosphere of grandiosity that people came so that they could get big in. And I wonder if you have any memories of that you could share, or think about how that changed your relation to his illness.
Is this a question for me or for Tom?
Yeah, for you.
Okay. Yeah, he would come out and visit me, you know, a couple times a year. And, you know, I had this whole sort of tribe of theater folk and filmmakers, and we were always working on some project, and we always were, you know, talking about pitching something to somewhere. And, you know, within that context, grandiosity is, you know, it's not only normal, but it's encouraged. And it always sort of struck me that while he, you know, grandiosity was one of his symptoms, that, you know, within the context of Hollywood, it was fairly normal. And, you know, there was even sort of this idea that in order to be a success, you had to be somewhat grandiose. You had to believe in yourself to that extent. So yeah, it was really interesting for his illness to be, you know, suddenly in this other context where, you know, everybody was just really excited about all of the big ideas that he had.
Right. Well, it has something to do with that he didn't really have a handle on pragmatics. So that was your guys' jobs, you know. But like, he was always, you know, he imagined himself in the other place, but the pragmatics of getting the other place were not a part of his leap. But I thought that was a very moving part of the story too, that you could go somewhere and feel like it was your people, because people weren't talking about the pragmatic. They were talking about their dreams as though they were real. Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. Janice, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm trying to put it together in a way that would be coherent. First, I've had this image of the missing limb. And this is partly because we lost Gabe when Carmen was going to be married. She was going to develop her life in a different way. But at that point, we'd spent a lot of time together as the four of us. We did a lot of traveling together. And Tom and I were just really happy to have these wonderful adult kids with us. And so I've had this image of a missing limb, but what constitutes that limb? And for me, I think, and a lot of people know this, I spent a lot of time after he passed, since I taught downtown, I spent a lot of time in his condo. And it was convenient, but also I wanted to kind of get some sense of him in the place where he lived. I did some composing there. I did some practicing some improvisations. And this also goes along with other things. I was basically, and Tom and Carmen helped, but basically the person who finally moved him out of his condo into our basement, of course. but I've looked at so many of his projects, his notebooks, his contacts. He had this huge Rolodex with all these people, people we hardly knew, and he had all this information on them. So I've been trying to kind of reconstitute the world that he lived in as much as I can. At the same time, also, he and I had a lot of connections through music, and he was teaching me about hip hop. He would make me cassettes with all these hip hop people, and he was very encouraging of my performances. And I have a poem where he would always whistle really loudly when I had a performance. So we were connected, I think, in those ways as well. And now I'm, well, as part of the family, hoping to keep the legacy going. I'm the one who kind of deals with the website and getting new things up. And I've learned to make snippets of his films and put them on the website. And so I'm trying to maintain a certain amount of his presence in the world, but also for me. And that changes some, but it's my regret that not having him, our images, each of our images of him are kind of fixed in a way. And that's painful. That's just what that is.
That's right. Right. It's not that you don't have a relation, but he's not contributing more images to it.
Right. Yes. Right.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the trajectory of my life with my son went from being in the early onset of his illness, just completely panicked. It made me withdraw quite a bit. I was chair of our English department when he first fell ill, and I started drinking. I really pulled back a lot from engagement with the university to focus on him. Our relationship was, we were very close. Thank heaven for Michael Jordan. In the 1990s, when he was falling ill, we watched every Bulls game together, almost. We hardly missed a one. And it was like living in a fantasy world of, every dream fulfilled, because Jordan was a mythic basketball player, and we were completely into the Michael idolatry of the moment. I always felt that when his artistic ambitions were at stake, Janice was his best counselor, because she's an artist. I'm a successful academic scholar, and I think we had a lot of friction over that. But Janice could explain to him, being an artist isn't, all hunky-dory. It's actually very hard work, and you have to accept disappointment, small audiences, lack of appreciation. It comes with the territory of being an artist in our world. So the thing, though, that changed as he matured and as he began to master this terrible interior life of nightmares, of voices and visions that he successfully concealed from most people, but not from us. We got some insight into it. What he did when he turned toward the idea of saying, I'm going to turn schizophrenia from an affliction into a learning experience. I want to make a film about it. It's going to be as a 9-hour epic. It is going to cover the entire history of madness. And, oh, by the way, Dad, you're going to be my research assistant. At that time, I don't know if you remember, Lauren, we had a conversation at one point. I said, maybe I should retire, go into business with him. I thought about it long and hard, and then decided that another thing was happening. Whenever he would show me a script or anything, if I made any criticism whatsoever, he would say, I don't want any of your criticism. Just tell me it's great and we'll be fine. So I realized being too close to him, being a collaborator on a project, I would have never been able to say what I thought. And it probably would have been bad for him. Bad for both of us. So I decided not to do it. but I did sign on as his research assistant. And I also realized toward the end of his life, I had a back injury where I had to be wheeled around in a wheelchair for about 6 weeks around 2009, 2010. He took over my care, and it was incredibly good for him. He suddenly became the caregiver, and I was the one who was being taken care of. It was a fantastic reversal of our roles, and I loved it too. I started to think, hey, this is so good for my son. I want to stay in the wheelchair. Not really, but the thought crossed my mind. So yeah, we all had a different dimension of him, and he had a big soul. I think that's all of this work I've done, writing a book about his life, and now continuing my academic work as a kind of homage to his project. I hope next year a book called Seeing Through Madness will come out, and it really is completely inspired by his effort to transform madness from the outside, from the excluded, from the thing you can't understand or talk about, into a framework. And just a little pitch for this, the more I look at contemporary reality, the year we're in, the year 2020, and our national psychosis, it looks to me like, he was very interested in collective madness, how groups go crazy, not just individuals. And that has really, he delivered to me an idea that we could think of madness as a critical framework rather than just an object of investigation or treatment.
Yes, well, I think you all have described a kind of shifting between being a reality check and being a cheerleader for Gabe. And, I met him when he was 10. I did a little research this morning. I met him when he was 10, and I hung out in his cafe, the one you talk about on page 50. That was a place I went to work. So I saw him a lot when he was working for Jewel and at the other thing. So what you guys have is from soundtrack to the moving image, you have a live Gabe.
Yeah.
And, and that essential Gabe. But your role was different because it was also who was the top friend and who was the bottom friend, who was the referent, who took care of whom. Sometimes you were equals, sometimes you were buddies, and sometimes you had to be the dad and give bad news. And it's just your memoir is remarkable in kind of trying to show the boundary problems in any family, and also in the family of somebody whose boundaries were being delivered to him daily in different forms. I mean, it was really something. And I think the centrality of cinema to the book has something to do with that sense of suture and what can be made of it. Also, we were going to talk about grandiosity a little bit because I thought it was really interesting, and it kind of came up organically. How do you think now about having big dreams? The way that Gabe's, somebody asked on the chat, was he an artist before he was ill, or was he ill before he was an artist? And you're not allowed to say both, So how do you think about his relation to fantasy and making objects in a way that, that might generate an image of him?
Yeah. Yeah, grandiosity to me is a completely, it's one of the most insoluble parts of schizophrenia and mental illness generally. There's no doubt that he had it in spades, but also that there's this caricature of grandiosity from 19th century psychology, where somebody thinks they're Napoleon or Jesus. It was never that kind of grandiosity. It was more toward grandeur of ambition, coupled with a lack of realism about how to accomplish it. And the big lesson I had to learn as a father, it's actually, Bill Ayers was the one who kind of told this to me straight out. He said, listen, you can't go around trying to correct or discipline his grandiosity. You just have to play along, go with the flow. The world will take care of the reality principle just fine without your intervention. It's a hard lesson for me to learn because people like Lauren and me and many of you we're trained as what we call critics. We're supposed to be skeptical, rational, demanding evidence and good reasons and things like that. So it was very hard. I mean, it was hard for me to be a good life coach for him, since I wanted so much for him to realize his ambitions, and yet they were always outstripping what I could imagine he was going to achieve.
Right.
The 9-hour film, I think, if he could have survived, I believe in the project. I think, if Kadar wants it, we'll give it to him for free.
Well, it's interesting because the version of Gabe that the family is holding is very much a version of him as a storyteller, and a kind of endless, infinite storyteller. And the genre I know him best in is conversation. I mean, the minute you encountered him, whole worlds would just erupt, because there would be some kind of dynamic bubble. But it wasn't so much storytelling. But I think the artist Gabe, the family artist. I mean, you're all artists, really, in the sense that you're all storytellers. Was pretty remarkable. So I would have said his storytelling came first, and then he found form later. But I wonder what the rest of the family thinks about this, or what you think about
that. I think I can speak to that. Sorry, there's some background noise here. I definitely, in my film, I'm really exploring his sort of personal narrative. He had he had a lot of stories about how he'd become ill and what it meant, and what that were kind of spoke to his ambition and all of that. And so his narrative, which came through his scripts and everything, really became the story of how he was going to survive this illness. And it's really fascinating to me. It's almost as if he thought he could write his own story. Like schizophrenia, the story of schizophrenia is not a good story. It doesn't usually have a good outcome. And it was almost as if he was creating this counter narrative to that, where he would survive, and not only survive, but he would thrive, he would be successful, and he would prove everybody wrong. And, like my dad was saying, every screenplay he wrote had a happy ending. And I think he was narrative really became a way of surviving the illness. And I think it's something that I think we can all relate to that in one way or another. I mean, we're all the protagonist of our own stories, and we all remember our life stories in certain ways that allow us to be the hero or the heroine. So I think in some ways what he did is no different from what we all do. It was just maybe more amplified in a way.
Yeah, he had a massive and beautiful will. Yes, that was a great description. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Janice?
No, I think Carmen expressed it really well.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think my time is almost up, but I told you that I would ask you all at the end whether there was a question you wish someone would ask you, and so that you could answer it, you could speak to it. Did anyone think of one?
It's it's a kind of people wonder sometimes, said, what was it like living with this for 20 years? On onset of the illness, really as a freshman in college, a life until just short of his 39th birthday, so almost 20 years of struggle. What is the narrative of that 20 years? And I tried to tell it, but it's sort of my part of it. I know that I was the thing that kept me going, and I think that maybe if there's a lesson in my book for anybody who has a mental traveler in their family, is we're all mental travelers. All of us go through something, but in Gabe's case, it was extremely severe. It was prolonged. But it's not like some homogeneous thing. It's not like you flip a switch and now you have schizophrenia and that's who you are. This is why he fought. At first, he fought the label, then he adopted it, then he flaunted it, then he took it back again. And this was also reflected in the way that, from a practical standpoint, he dealt with it. I've always felt the one big lesson I learned about mental illness from this long life experience was that it's not one thing, and it's not always, a person is not crazy 24 hours a day. They're mostly lucid. They're mostly with us. It's like moments of stress, extreme, bad days, good days. There were so many good days. And so I really wanted to cling to that as one of the most important parts of the story, that no matter how terribly ill he could be and how difficult it could be, I think it was impossible to stop loving him. It was just like, that was unthinkable. And a lot of people who've told stories about having mentally ill siblings, children, parents, have said how destructive it is to a family. I hope you can all see, this really made our family what it is. It brought us together around him as, love object, care object, and also, in his way, a kind of inspiration for his creativity and the grandeur, not the grandiosity, but the grandeur of his ambition. He had a good story to tell, and when he would meet a new person, they would get drawn into the story right away, and that's why so many people cared about him, because he was a kind of inspiring guy. So
that's great. Carmen, Janice, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think for me, the getting back to your question of the question that we would want to be asked, the question about what does stigma do to a person, I think is really important. There's a lot of stigma around mental illness, but particularly around schizophrenia. That's the one label that you can't, it is just not accepted. Being bipolar, which a lot of times has some of the very same symptoms, is more accepted now. You can have a successful career and be bipolar. You can have a partner and be bipolar. But there's this idea that once you have that label of schizophrenia, that you are cast out. And that's something that Gabe actually said in one of the interviews I did with him, was that it was like being sent to a desert island and being exiled from society, basically. And to me, when one of my questions and one of the things I think about a lot is, was it really the illness that killed him, or was it the stigma? Was it the idea that you can never get better and you can never be fully accepted? And that's something that I am sort of exploring in my film, and a conversation that I hope that it helps spur, that, schizophrenia is not who the person is, that it's helpful only in terms of providing a map for treatment, but that it's not necessarily helpful in terms of like an identity. At least not now.
Well, I mean, all the punctuation of, how he dealt with his diagnosis throughout the book too, is very much like, he needs the version of the story he could flourish with, so that he could remain proud of himself. He had a lot of pride. That was really important. And even when he's on the make, like in that cafe, he's always on the make. But it was the pride of the person who wanted something from you and felt like they could ask you. So I think what you're saying is very powerful. There are two people in the chat. One is asking, what would you say to a person with schizophrenia? And I feel like, we've gone down that road. And then someone has asked about how do you turn bipolarity or sort of anything into, how does the memoir form itself make other people who identify as impaired feel like they could have a story that isn't just the effect of things, but being the cause of things, as you were describing. Is there anything else that you'd want to say to that?
I felt it was through his art that enabled him to survive. And I think that's something that probably people with illnesses will have to have as a part of what they do, whatever it might be. The other thing that I think we provided for him, though, we, as much as possible, tried to treat him as if he was, basically normal and stable. I mean, he might call with things that, so-and-so didn't get back to me and I wanted to have this job at Google. And you had to kind of decide how far you would go in terms of saying, well, wouldn't be realistic or humor him or not. These were decisions we had to make. But I think he had a sense most of the time about our really loving him. Yeah. Sometimes he would accuse us of not, but I think that was still there basically. And so that was a very important aspect. The other part though, he did talk to me a lot about his symptoms. We talked about medication. We talked about speaking with therapists who were not helpful. There was a point where he kind of reached a deep point that he might have gone to a therapist who was better. He might have dealt with medication, and this is maybe a week, and then no, I don't want any of that. I can help myself. And so it was very difficult. He was very rigid about that. He was very rigid initially about not taking medication. And then through a kind of finagling between Carmen and me, then he agreed to it. And then he would say he's only taking it so he can get the benefits from Social Security, So he was trying to see himself as, not that sick. And that was part of the story as well. He knew on the one side that he had these horrible voices, but on the other side, he was kind of angry. And he said, I want to be taken just as a normal person, the way everyone else is. So I think these conflicts were happening within him, and we would see that, but not all the time. It wasn't always that evident.
Now, was there something that you wish someone would ask you?
Well, we've discussed all of these things. I don't think there's anything else.
So is this a good time to turn to your poem?
Oh, yeah. So did you have any particular ones you wanted?
Oh, I'm not the boss. I'm just here to submit.
Okay, just two. One of them, the first one is about some things I mentioned about about our kind of sharing arts. And also people who know me, know my work, know that I do a lot with voices. And he used my piece, he used Mad Song, which is a cappella voices that are based on Blake's Mad Song in his film. Of course, always without asking me. And sometimes there's no attribution at all. Sometimes there is. So there's a reference in this one poem. And then another piece called Metaphorsis, which is we made way back before kids even. And that's an electronic piece that has a lot of voices in it. And a reference to Vanishing Point's Quantum Leaps, which I think will be clear because that was the piece I was working on that week when his last week. So
you have a page number? That'd be super great for those of us in the congregation.
Oh, yeah, okay. It's sort of longish and the next one is shorter. Page 138, I'm standing at the foot of the stairs.
Okay.
It's June 22nd. This is 2013, the next year. It's June 22nd and I'm standing at the foot of the stairs in the living room saying goodbye and not knowing it will be the last time I see you alive. You've had lunch, coffee. You say you're not feeling well, you're tired. You may not want to go out tonight. There's an avant-garde opera I'm in, or a movie with Dad. I ask you if you'll be all right. You say yes. I tell you to get some rest. We hug and say goodbye. You go out the door. I watch you go down the street. It was the last time. How not to know? To think it was just another day, another Friday afternoon, the evening beginning new things after a week of heady, detailed music. My vanishing points, quantum leaps, where Pat said you stared at me conducting during the whole piece. And then there was always your very loud whistle at all the concerts when my music was played, and you were there. You did leap. Who would have thought? I also ask myself, why have I always been so fascinated by voices? Not just the kids singing in harmony on the porch, but why the voices in Metaphorsis? And why was I writing Mad Song the winter you napped upstairs in Oakland Park? Is it just irony that you died hearing voices? What does my attraction to them mean? And how far can I go with them and still not threaten? How far can I go without trying to recreate what I think you might have heard? And why do I do this? I sound like you when you were very young and always asking why, until that funny time in the car on the trip to Michigan, I'm thinking, you say, why do I ask why? Now I just ask why when I remember you. As time goes on, you are farther and farther away. How to keep you alive as time goes on. I'm not talking now of works, we are making that happen, but how to keep you alive in spirit, in some kind of presence. I hold your photo, the one with the great smile, blue shirt, Columbus, and I go to the foot of the stairs. And I remember the last time I saw you, hugged you. Stay with us now, in some way, stay with us. And this is a timely one. It's about Thanksgiving 2014. Thanksgiving, thanks. Giving thanks for you, our life with you, now lost and found in memory and in pain of lost. I think of giving to you and forgiving you for giving me such deep and lasting sadness. Your way of giving made people feel blessed and confused about who you were. Who you were, some of this you kept from us. You had that right, an obligation, you thought, not to hurt further, to protect us. But it didn't work. We should have known. We sat there, self-enclosed, blinded, not seeing or knowing what was there that harmed you and took from you your life.
That's amazing. I don't even know how you read that.
No.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So this is where I open up to the audience. You see that in the chat, people are clapping for you.
Oh, okay.
And there's one question we haven't answered from the chat, but maybe, I don't know, Jesse, if there's another way that you normally take questions. Yes, it's so beautiful. I'm very interested in thinking about beauty in the space of this too, you know, and the relation between aesthetics and stigma, you know, the beauty and stigma here, and providing an aesthetic form for something that's also unbearable. Maybe you guys have something to say about that. But anyway, somebody's asked, were there certain patterns or motifs that occurred in his art, like in the Ice Cube, like in the Cube projects or in the Happy Endings? Were there other images that have stuck in your mind as evidence of something more, just as his expressivity, or as surprises even?
Can I take that one up?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. He had the infinite cube that Gormley realized was just the culmination of a long project Gabe had. He made a film called Grid Theory, and it was based on a book by a very dear colleague of mine, Hannah Higgins, who I think may be here in the audience. Hannah wrote a book, the Grid book, and Gabe plagiarized outrageously from it. He took the images and he turned them into a film. And he developed an anti-Cartesian geometry. the idea was it would be a grid like a Cartesian grid, but it would not have any negative numbers or spaces in it. It was all positivity. And it did not go out from 0 to the perimeter. In Cartesian coordinates, as you know, you have your X and Y axis, and the 0 is at the center. His 0 was at the periphery, and it went around the periphery, spiraling inward. So it was something like a vortex, a Cartesian vortex turned into a grid. So this film is called Grid Theory. It's on his website, and he corresponded with mathematicians about squaring the circle. I kind of hesitatingly said, mathematicians don't think that's a real problem anymore. They think you can't do it. But he said, that's fine for them. I'm going to do it. Very typical of him. And so this film about you might call mystical geometry was one of the things he was very much committed to. There was also films that were more like comedies. He loved, and we both loved, wild comedy, because he part of his sense of what madness opened into the world was not merely suffering, tragedy, depression, melancholia, but zaniness, wildness, joy, a kind of exuberance. And Lauren has raised the question of beauty. I mean, we often talked about Blake's wonderful proverb, exuberance is beauty, that it is this overflow of imagination and emotion. So he was also a romantic. One diagnosis, if we hadn't had psychiatry around, we would have said he's suffering from a broken heart. That was his self-diagnosis. He fell in love with a girl in college, and it was impossible. It wasn't going to happen, and he never got over it. It was like R.D. Laing talks about schizophrenia and the broken heart as a kind of shattering sense of self. Where's the boundary of yourself? So that was another side of it, was this unrequited love that was a huge part of his life. He once proposed to one of my colleagues. We had gone for a drive on the Upper Corniche outside Nice. Wonderful day at the end of an academic conference that he went with me to. And he started talking to my colleague, who was 10 years older than him, fell in love with her immediately. And by the end of the day, he proposed marriage to her. And she was very polite. Gabe, you're a wonderful person. I can imagine a wonderful life with you, but I already have somebody. So later he said, Dad, I don't think she took me seriously. And no, I think she did. I think she did.
Well, the broken-hearted thing is interesting because prior to his finding the woman who he could long for, he had started dispossessing himself of his things with homeless people.
Yes.
And so there was this sense of having too much self too. And a lot of these very passionate and kind of literal-minded gestures of dispossession, like I'm giving you my coat, I'm giving you my money, I'm giving you my cigarettes, and so I wonder, how do you think about dispossession in relation to this kind of instability or into his life? Or
it was absolutely central. He would have literally he did give his winter coat away when he was a freshman at NYU. In fact, the first symptomatic kind of announcement I got was a phone call from him telling me he had something important to tell me. And I said, okay, what is it? He said, I've made a decision. I have to become homeless. And it wasn't, he wasn't saying, I'm afraid of becoming homeless. It was, I need to become homeless. And I said, why? What are you talking about? I tried to steer it toward, oh, you could be a social worker, Gabe, and work with homeless. I said, no, forget that. That's not what I'm talking about. He said, I have been meeting with a lot of human beings in Washington Square. He was a freshman at NYU. And a lot of them are mentally ill, as you know. But he said they are in touch with reality in a way that, by the way, you and Mom are completely clueless about. He said, what do you, I said, you don't want to do that. You want to sleep on a park bench? And he said, what do you really know about it, Dad? You're safe in your warm house and all that. You live in this cushy academic lifestyle. The homeless know what the real world is. This was the first symptom, and I think it signaled where this illness was taking him toward a kind of affirmation of getting rid of things, dispossessing himself. He also tried to bring homeless people into his dorm room, which, needless to say, the authorities did not appreciate. But he couldn't understand. He said, my room, you're paying for it. What's the big deal? Very hard to argue with that.
Okay, here is an art historian's question. Does all schizophrenic art have a common character? Is there something they all share? Some art historians have said so, but you probably have looked at this more deeply than others. Another way to say this, was Gabriel part of an artistic school?
I would say no. That's what my instant answer is no. And I have never wanted to give schizophrenia any credit at all, or maybe my own perversity, but I just, the whole thing of the mad artist, and that an artist has to be mad and so forth, I'm deeply suspicious of that. I think he was dealt a tough hand and did extremely well with condition of considerable suffering. So I often think of his work, if there's a reactive portion to it, it's the rationalism, the kind of Cartesianism, which I think he used to resist any sense of a chaotic artistic expression. His comedy about the jewels was one place where he was kind of letting himself go with wildness. But no, in fact, I didn't see, aside from his obsession with the grid and geometry, I didn't see a single style or mode.
So, but I think the question was also, in the next book, are you making a claim for any kind of patterning?
May I follow up?
Yeah.
My question? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I think that in Kreis and Gombrich's book, Psychoanalytic Explorations in Art, and other books that look at outsider artists, particularly schizophrenic artists, there's a certain kind of character, and it may be that we only recognize it because it's been pointed out to us, but the character is what you call a grandiosity, that is a desire to fill every corner of a page, to have repetition, to have certain patterns, starburst patterns, or grids that fill every inch of a page. Now, of course, since the grid is so much a modernist motif anyway, it's more difficult to highlight that as a trait or a character of schizophrenic art. But I just wonder whether Gabe's art, since you've probably looked, Tom, at so much art that's been described as schizophrenic, whether you see any resemblances to art that's been looked at by modernists in the earlier 20th century, and seeing whether there's any parallels there, or if there's any schizophrenic artists with whom you would like to compare Gabriel.
Yeah, I have looked at, the what is it, the Prinzhorn collection,
exactly,
and other collections. Within that, of course, what you're saying is there is a frequent appearance of system, of encyclopedism, of going all the way out to the edge, filling in every detail. But there's also things like the contrary as well, a kind of expressive splashing of pigment, or also cartoonish. One of my favorite works of his is called Desolation Row Revisited, which is an animated, it's not quite animated, it's a film in which he rewrote Bob Dylan's song Desolation Row, and performed it with a guitarist, and he imitated Bob Dylan's folding out picture after picture of drawings.
Right.
I could show you some of them, but I don't want to break up our discussion. It's but I recommend it, Desolation Row Revisited, and it's a set. It shows him as a superhero in a cartoon world, a very damaged hero. And in one of my favorite scenes, he's turned into a gangbanger with one leg, riding on a one-legged bicycle. So very figurative. So it could go from geometry to and the medium itself. He was ready to tackle almost any medium, including poetry.
One thing I would add, though, in his work, you have to make a distinction between when he was not medicated and when he was medicated. And in the earlier years, before it was actually not a full-blown case of schizophrenia, he was doing pen and inks, which totally filled the page, writing his name in tiny, tiny letters, and a lot of things that you would say would be much closer to what you're talking about, Stephen. And then later, once he started getting on different kinds of medication, he got control and used his imagination in ways that he could convey an image to people without it seeming as if it was out of control. But there was definitely a period before that it was, you could see that there was something that we might see as ill in that work.
Fantastic. Are there other questions? Just chime in.
Yeah, just feel free to turn on your mic.
I will ask something, Tom and your family. My line on, so you can see me. You know, it's I feel in you a great solidarity with it, a kind of refusal to put an end to the grieving, and I feel that very strongly, a kind of a resistance to closure and a refusal to accept that it gets better, and all of that kind of self-help thinking, much of which is well-meaning, but I'm against it. And then there's, on the other hand, a view that I very much am sympathetic with, which is to be against melancholy as a continuation of mourning without end, and not to accept mourning. So I wonder what you think about that.
I'm totally on board with you, Charles. I don't know if I would call it a refusal to mourn. We did
a refusal to mourn, a refusal to stop mourning. Yeah. And actually, Lauren Berlant, who I know a little bit in respect to this, and especially Chicago, I mean, this is a question, of course, that you write about as well. So I was thinking of it for both of you. I don't think any of the three of us think of theory as being not a part of our affective reality. For me, it's the same thing. But nonetheless, I am really very sympathetic to the criticism of melancholy. And I don't think I'm melancholic. I'm just not willing to put this aside. And now I'm old enough, and you certainly are, where I don't have to. Mm-hmm. I could just continue on, and that's the way it is. And I have to say, it was hard to watch this presentation with you and your family, but it's very disturbing for me. But I don't, another aspect to this is, people want to say this to you too. It comes up, I think, also in what you're saying, people will always say, oh, I don't want to bring up X, in my case, Emma, who I know that Lauren knew, and you knew, my daughter committed suicide at 23, very different time, and was probably bipolar, but we didn't know it. And I always say, well, you know, you're bringing up, I never stop thinking about it. I'm thinking about it all day long. You're not somehow, I'm like in La La Land and you're bringing up something that I'm not aware of. No, I mean, absolutely talk to you about it. But a lot of people feel that somehow they're going to remind you of something you've forgotten. So that's another aspect to it. It's not something I stopped to put behind me. I mean, maybe I should be on a kind of drug that would allow me to do that, but I don't even want such a drug.
Right.
None of us do. And, you know, my dear friend, Elizabeth Abel at Berkeley, last year we published an essay by her on a forgotten part of Freud on mourning. The title of her essay is Mourning and Mania. I think we are manic mourners. In the sense that we want to keep on celebrating his life and what a gift he was to us. You know, it's a kind of refusal. I think it is a refusal of melancholia, as you know, this syndrome which you get into and then you get over. Of course, it comes and goes, but to me, the more important thing is the energy he bequeathed to us, and to keep that energy going forward. It's what pushes me forward. I know that. Lauren, can you address that, because I know you're the host, but somehow it seems like you've been sitting here listening to us all,
Yeah.
and it relates to so much of what you write about.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think Carmen wanted to talk, so maybe I should let Carmen talk, and then I'll do some closing.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with that. Also, I think, you know, there's a idea that people have that you shouldn't ask, you shouldn't, you know, that people don't want to talk about it, and that may be true of some people. I think for us, we've always wanted to share Gabe's story, and that it's actually really helpful. What's hard is feeling that you have to hide this tragedy that's happened to you. So I definitely agree with what you're saying, and I think that you know, for all of us, it's sort of like we just want Gabe to be a continued presence in our lives, and you know, and he is, like, I feel like he has a seat at the table. You know, we talk about him a lot. I talk about him with my son. He's, you know, he's become part of our family's story, and you know, the idea of, like, kind of keeping your, you know, your ancestors alive, and keeping that everybody is still with you in one way or another. And the way that we do that is by telling stories. You know, my grandparents are still very much a part of our family, even though they've been gone for a while now. But they're, you know, it's like we just want to keep telling those stories so those people continue to have a place at the table, I think.
Well, I guess that's beautiful, Carmen. I guess I have sort of two things to say to Charles, but, you know, I'd be happy to talk anytime, believe me, about this. One is, I think the reason, and I just speak, I'm very private about some stuff, and I think the reason that people are scared to ask is because they don't want to blindside you. And it's one thing to say, I want to talk about the thing that you can never erase. You know, the thing about trauma is you can never erase it. You can only put it near other things that make it different, you know. And I think the question of timing and of presuming that you would be willing to be open at a moment you weren't prepared to be, I think that's real. I don't think it's just about whether you loved your object and whether you symptomatize your love, but also about whether this person is somebody who you would want to be surprised in front of. I guess it would be a way of saying it. Or as one of my colleagues said to me, I didn't know you would cry. And I'm like, really? Okay. And the other thing is, I think a lot about this with people like MFB too, is that one way to think of, Tom talked about PTSD occasionally in the book. And one of the things that some trauma theorists talk about is that you never don't have the object, but you can move the object. And I think what Janice and Carmen and Tom have been talking about tonight is how they remediate Gabe, how they can keep him signifying, but also that the story isn't stuck back a few years ago, but remains on the move. And I think that's the importance and power of the aesthetic that you've given us tonight. I'm really grateful. I'm grateful that everybody stayed so long, and I wish we had more time. We extended it another half hour because Tom was afraid we would be crunching, and we're still crunching. And but I think it's time to close up now. Do you want to say anything finally, Tom?
Oh, well, should I be playing though, is the question.
Oh, you want to play? Absolutely. Play us out.
That'll play you out, right? Okay. Yeah, okay. And just another thing from what you were saying, which Gabe says in Carmen's film, that beyond the grave, people are still changing.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah. Okay.
I lose this.
So this is a piece I wrote starting as an improvisation in 2014, and now it's pretty well formed. As many, or some of you know, I use text and flute simultaneously. This is based on a phrase from Blade Runner, which was one of Gabe's favorite films. And some of you know the circumstances. I'm not going to go into that too much, but it's about a replicant named Roy who wants more life. And his creator, Terrell, said, "But Roy, you know, the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long." And he goes on to say, "And you have burned so very brightly, Roy." So this is in memory of Gabe and all those who have passed too soon. The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. The light, that burns twice as bright burns as
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks, Jesse. And thank you, Seminary Co-op. I went over the other day, was actually able to sign books. So if any of you want to order your books from the Seminary Co-op, you get my autograph inside.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.